Casting on is how we get stitches onto our knitting machine. To start, we need to attach the machine to a table. Place your homemade knitting machine on the edge of a table so that the main part is flush to the edge. Then use long pieces of invisible tape to attach both ends of the card to the table securely, sticking the tape on the shiny bits of the card. Once the machine is secure to the table, we can start adding stitches onto our needles. We do this by E-wrapping. Start by taking the end of your yarn and use invisible tape to attach it to the table at the left of your machine. Then drop your ball of yarn onto the floor. Now take the yarn in both hands so that you have complete control over its movement in between your left and right hand. You now need to wrap the yarn around each needle as if you were drawing a small E. This is E-wrapping. Starting with the first needle on the left, take the yarn to the right of the needle, over and under, gently pushing the stitch to the back of the needle. Then take the yarn to the right of the next needle, over and under, and push the stitch to the back. Make sure you don't wrap the yarn too tightly round the needle. Continue in this way until you have E-wrapped all of the needles on the knitting machine bed. Once you have E-wrapped all of the needles, pull on the stitches slightly to ensure they are not wrapped too tightly around the needles. You now have stitches on all of your needles. To knit your first row, lay the yarn over the first needle on the right, laying it from right to left and ensuring it's in front of the stitch already on the needle. You now have 2 pieces of yarn laying over one needle. To knit your first stitch, lift the back piece of yarn over the front piece and off the end of the needle. Repeat the laying of the yarn and the lifting of the stitch on the next needle to the left. Continue across the bed, laying the yarn and lifting the stitches as you go. You may want to pull on the newly made stitch slightly to ensure it's not too tight around the needle. Knit the next row with the same method as you did the first, but this time lay the yarn from left to right. After you've knitted each row, pull on each stitch to check it's not too tight around the needle. Continue knitting, going right to left and left to right until you have knitted about 6 rows. When we use a brother knitting machine, we hang claw weights like these onto our knitting. We do this to ensure that the knitting doesn't bounce up as we knit, making our stitches fall off the needles. But what if you don't have any claw weights? Well, you can improvise and make your own. These ones are made from 2 bulldog clips with lumps of plasticine on them. As a guide, claw weights usually weigh about 100 grams each, but yours may not need to be so heavy. Experiment. Just make sure that you have at least 2 weights and that the weight is distributed evenly. Once the weights are on your knitting, you should find it easier to knit. You can now remove the yarn that is stuck to the table and continue knitting as you wish. You should always change colour or introduce a new yarn on the same side of the machine as your current yarn. Take your new yarn and tape the end of it to the table on that side of the machine. Let the old yarn hang down and use the new ball of yarn to knit with, dropping the ball on the floor before you start knitting. Carry on knitting, laying the yarn over the needles and moving the stitches as before. When you have knitted a couple of rows in the new yarn, cut the old yarn that is hanging down. Then remove the tape holding the end of the new yarn to the table. Then tie the 2 ends of yarn together. Continue knitting as desired. Why not try knitting with some homemade yarns? For example, you could try tights, rubber gloves, or even plastic bags.